I've never been one to believe in scary things or out of the ordinary situations, but what happened to me and my girlfriend, Clara, during Valentine's week is something I still can't comprehend. It all started so innocently that looking back now, it feels surreal how quickly things escalated. On Monday of that week, we received a bouquet of flowers at the door of our apartment. It was a beautiful arrangement, full of red roses and lilies, with a card that simply said, "For a special couple." Clara thought it might have been from someone at her work, perhaps part of an advertising campaign or something like that. We laughed, found it curious, and left the bouquet on the living room table. On Tuesday, another bouquet showed up. This time the lilies were mixed with daisies, and the card read, "You two are perfect together." Clara began to find it strange, but I was still convinced it was some sort of prank, maybe someone in the building trying to be funny. But on Wednesday, the third bouquet arrived with a message that made me pause. The card said, "You always have dinner at the same time." What a lovely couple. The reference to our routine gave me a sinking feeling in my stomach. Clara was visibly nervous. Who could possibly know that we always had dinner at 8 o'clock? I remember that night we spent hours discussing who might be watching us. She wanted to alert building management, but I said it was probably just a coincidence and that we shouldn't worry. How I regret that now. On Thursday, the fourth bouquet arrived. This time the flowers were different, simpler, but the card was what sent my nerves over the edge. "That blue pajama looks great on you, Clara." I felt my blood run cold. Clara wears that pajama almost every night, but she's never worn it outside the house. Whoever wrote that must have been watching us from inside or very close by. At this point, the discomfort turned into fear. I locked all the windows, checked the locks, and even looked under the bed as if I might find someone hiding there. Clara was panicked and insisted we call the police, but I thought that would be an overreaction. Maybe out of pride, or maybe because I simply didn't want to believe that someone could be spying on us. On Friday, the bouquet arrived in a different way. It wasn't left at the apartment door. It was on the ledge of the living room window. The window was on the third floor. There was no way someone could have placed it there without access to our apartment, or at the very least without a ladder. This time the card read, "Friday is pizza night, right? I prefer pepperoni." That was the last straw. Clara started crying, saying she wanted to go to her parents' house. I called the building manager and asked about the cameras, but to my surprise, he said the camera in the hallway on our floor had been broken for weeks. That only made my fear worse. I decided I would stay up all night keeping watch while Clara tried to sleep. That night, I stayed in the living room with the lights off, watching the window and the door. The silence in the apartment was almost unbearable, broken only by muffled sounds from the street. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the fact that someone had managed to get so close to us without being noticed kept me on the edge of panic. Around 3 a.m., I heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen. It wasn't a sound I could ignore. It sounded like something metallic had fallen. I grabbed a knife and headed toward it, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it echoed through the apartment. When I turned on the light, everything seemed to be in place. I searched the cabinets, opened the fridge, checked every corner, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The only thing I noticed was the service area window, which was slightly ajar. I was certain I had locked it earlier. When I went to close it, I saw something that made my breath catch. There were rose petals scattered on the windowsill outside. I looked down the hallway of the building from the window, but there was no one there. I immediately turned off the light and went back to the living room, feeling like something far worse was about to happen. I couldn't sleep after that. My girlfriend, despite being scared, managed to fall asleep in the bedroom, but I stayed in the living room, completely on edge. Every sound had me up, checking the doors and windows. Around 5 a.m., as the sky was starting to lighten, I heard something that made my blood run cold, the doorknob of the front door turning. I ran to check, but the door was still locked. However, when I looked through the peephole, I saw something that left me frozen. A bouquet of flowers identical to the others had been left outside. I opened the door slowly, making no noise, and grabbed the bouquet. There was no one in the hallway as usual. I quickly shut the door and prepared to open the note that came with it. This time, the paper looked more crumpled, as if it had been written in a hurry. The note said, "Did you enjoy the visit? See you soon." The only thing I could think of was that this person had been inside our home the night before, left the petals on the window, and was now taunting me, showing they could return at any moment. I couldn't wait any longer. I called the police and explained the entire situation. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first, but when I mentioned that someone had entered the house and left the latest note, he said he would send a patrol car. While waiting, I tried to check all the building cameras again, but none showed any suspicious activity. It was as if this person appeared and disappeared without a trace. What unsettled me the most was that the door had never been forced open. When the officers arrived, they searched the apartment and found no signs of forced entry. I showed them the bouquets and the notes, but they only took notes and recommended that we change the locks and install internal cameras. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. They said that without concrete evidence or an identity for the stalker, there wasn't much they could do. I thanked them and stood there, paralyzed with a knot in my stomach, imagining what could happen next. After the police left, we decided to act quickly. We installed an additional lock on the door and a camera in the hallway. We also put locks on the windows, even though we lived on a high floor. That night felt endless. Every sound seemed amplified, and any movement outside the apartment made my heart race. My girlfriend was just as nervous as I was, and even though we tried to pretend we were calm, it was obvious that neither of us felt safe anymore. Around 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a faint noise coming from the living room. My body froze. For a second, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again. It sounded like something was being dragged, slowly. My girlfriend woke up too, her eyes wide, and she grabbed my arm tightly. I picked up my phone, ready to call the police again, but before I could dial, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, heading toward our bedroom. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and I could see a shadow cast on the floor by the faint light coming from the living room. My heart felt like it was pounding in my throat. With the phone in my hand, I called the police, keeping the volume muted. The operator answered, and all I could whisper was, "Someone is inside my apartment." My girlfriend was curled up next to me, holding her breath. The footsteps suddenly stopped, and the shadow disappeared. The silence was even more terrifying. We stayed completely still for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes, until we heard a metallic sound like something being placed on the floor in the hallway. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, but it felt like an eternity. When the officers entered, they found the front door unlocked, even though we were sure we had locked it. In the middle of the hallway floor was a bouquet. The note attached to it read, "Did you like the surprise? See you next time." Since that day, I've never been able to sleep peacefully again. We moved to a new apartment the very next day, but even so, the feeling of being watched never left me. To this day, I have no idea who it was or how they got in, but one thing I know for sure, they knew everything about us, and that wasn't the last time they found us. The first time I noticed the man on the corner, I admit I didn't think much of it. I figured he might be waiting for a cab or perhaps a neighbor watching the street. It was an ordinary day. I was heading to my girlfriend's house as I usually did, and the guy seemed normal, just a bit too still, staring directly in my direction. Something about him made me uneasy, but I shook it off, tried not to overthink, and kept walking. However, during my subsequent visits, he was there again, always in the same spot with the same posture, barely moving or blinking. His gaze seemed to pierce through me, and I could no longer ignore it. It wasn't until I mentioned him to my girlfriend that things started to make sense, and became far more disturbing. "That man on the corner, do you know him?" I asked casually, expecting to hear he was a neighbor or someone's relative. But her face went pale instantly, and she stiffened. "It's him," she whispered. When I pressed her to explain, she told me about a stalker who had tormented her for years. He used to follow her everywhere, standing outside her workplace, her college, and even her old home. Then, as if by some miracle, he disappeared months ago. She thought she had finally escaped him, but now, it seemed, he was back. The next night, I was more alert than ever. As usual, I went to my girlfriend's house, and once again, the man was there on the corner, standing still, staring in my direction. It made me so nervous that I looked out her window to check if he was still there, but I couldn't see him. The feeling of being watched consumed me, and I started to wonder if he was truly following us or if it was all some bizarre coincidence. I thought about leaving, but my girlfriend insisted I stay. She tried to reassure me, saying he hadn't appeared in so long that he probably wasn't a threat anymore. But when I got home, I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to check my car before heading inside. What I found made my blood run cold. He was there, sitting in the back seat, holding a knife, a photo of me and my girlfriend from a recent outing, and a note, "I know everything about you." The man, the same one from the corner, had invaded my car and left this terrifying message. I panicked. How did he know so much about us? How did he get into my car? The only thing I could think was, he never really left. I didn't know what to do. The feeling of being watched became even more real now that the man had invaded my personal space. I took a deep breath, trying to think rationally, but the fear wouldn't go away. Something was terribly wrong, and the idea that he might still be nearby consumed me. What did he want? What did he know about us? I stared at the photo, trying to figure out how he'd taken it when we'd been so careful about everything. The one thing that became clear was that he knew our every move, as if he'd been watching us the entire time. Then my girlfriend called me. She was scared too. There was a tension in her voice that didn't subside. She told me that earlier that day, after we said goodbye, she noticed the man was closer than ever before. She even tried talking to him, but he just ignored her and walked away. I was shocked by what she told me, but the worst was yet to come. When we went to her house together, we searched for signs that he might have been there. That's when we found something else, another photo, this time more recent, taken while I was at her house, with an even more chilling note. "I'm not the only one watching you." That "we" sent a shiver down my spine. Whatever was going on, this man wasn't alone in his obsession anymore. We froze for a moment, staring at the photo and the note. We didn't know what to do, but the feeling of being watched had never been so intense. We decided to lock every door and window in the house, but there was an unsettling sense of helplessness, as if none of it would be enough. That man, or whoever he was already inside our minds. The fear was tangible. The fact that we no longer had control over the situation made me feel even more desperate. That night, we stayed up late, trying to plan our next move. But one thought kept gnawing at me. What if he was watching us right now? What if somehow he already knew where we were despite all our precautions? In the middle of the night, we heard a noise at the window. My girlfriend and I froze. It wasn't the wind or anything natural. It was something else, more deliberate, like someone was tampering with it. I went to the window, my heart pounding, and when I looked outside, there he was, the man from the corner. He was standing there, his eyes fixed on me. But this time, he wasn't alone. Next to him was another figure, hooded, with a strange gleam in their eyes. I couldn't fully comprehend what I was seeing, but the only thought that crossed my mind was, they know everything. My body froze as if fear had paralyzed me. The man was there at the corner, as always, but now there was someone with him, and the overwhelming sensation that something was about to happen consumed me. My girlfriend stood behind me, whispering for me to come back inside the house, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. He didn't move, and the hooded figure beside him seemed to be just waiting. I didn't know what to do. Logic told me to get out of there to call the police, but what if he had the knife again, like last time? For a moment, I thought about running, but what if he followed me to the car? Or worse, what if he was already inside the house waiting for us? The fear of moving in any direction, of taking any step, left me paralyzed. I didn't know what else to do, so I chose what felt safest, locking all the doors and windows and staying silent. The silence was the most terrifying part. It felt as if even the air was compressed, about to explode. I glanced at my girlfriend, who was on the verge of tears, and all she could say was, "I told you he was still around. What did he want from us?" The sound of a door slamming in the distance made me turn abruptly. It was locked, and then, amidst the tension, I heard it, a faint but unmistakable noise, something or someone fiddling with the locks. My thoughts became a blur. Panic took over. I knew I wasn't alone. The man from the corner had found a way in. The idea that he was already inside the house made the air feel even heavier. His face, his empty, cold expression was etched in my mind like a shadow I couldn't escape. My girlfriend was frozen too. I could see the fear in her eyes, but she didn't say a word. The silence was so intense that every sound felt like a scream. Each step I took was accompanied by a creak that only heightened my anxiety. What did he want? Why hadn't he shown himself this directly before? In desperation, I grabbed my phone and tried to call the police, but the line was dead. There was no signal. My heart pounded even harder. I was completely vulnerable, with an intruder inside my house and no way of knowing what his next move would be. I felt helpless, as if we were trapped in a nightmare with no way out, but something inside me urged me to try again. I shoved the phone into my pocket and, breathing heavily, Made my way to the kitchen, where the signal was slightly better. As soon as I held the phone near the window, the signal appeared, weak but enough to make a call. The police answered quickly. I managed to get a few words out, too shaken to be coherent. "There's someone in my house, a man. He has a knife. Please help." I could barely finish the sentence before hanging up, not even waiting for a response. I knew I was on edge, but the only thing that could keep us safe now was waiting. I couldn't think of anything else, just that he could appear at any moment. What felt like an eternity passed before the sound of sirens broke the silence, growing louder as they approached. The front door burst open, and in an instant, officers stormed in. The scene was chaotic, but their presence felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. The man was in the corner of the living room, in the dark, exactly where I'd left him. The knife lay on the ground beside him, and in his hand a photo of the two of us. The police subdued him quickly and took him away. He didn't say a word. Even though we were safe, the sense of violation and fear lingered for a long time. No one ever discovered what exactly motivated the man to do what he did. But one thing was clear. He knew too much. And although the nightmare had ended that night, I knew the fear of being watched would never truly leave me. I never thought something like this could happen to me. It was a peaceful evening, a romantic dinner I had planned for my girlfriend. We were at home, enjoying our time together, just the two of us. The soft glow of the candles and the scent of the food in the air gave a sense of comfort and safety. But something about that night felt off. During dinner, I noticed something that made me pause, a shadow by the window. I didn't think much of it at first, but the unease was immediate. I looked at my girlfriend, and without saying a word, she looked in the same direction. That's when we saw it clearly. Someone was standing outside, watching. We tried to ignore it. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone just passing by, or even our own shadow. But as the night went on and the light faded, an eerie feeling began to take hold of me. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure. The next day we went out for a walk, and when we came back, we saw footprints in the yard. They weren't normal footprints, but dirty tracks, as if someone had been walking there for hours. The worst part was when we noticed that objects in the garden, a chair, a plant, had been moved. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. We couldn't ignore it anymore. Someone was trying to get closer. The feeling of being watched was undeniable, and I could no longer relax. Each night, the figure at the window became more constant, more distinct, as if it was waiting for the right moment to come even closer. We began locking all the doors and windows, but still, it felt like something was watching us. One night, when I woke up in the middle of the night, I noticed something even more terrifying. The picture frame that had always hung on the living room wall had moved slightly. I went to check, but I didn't find anything. I was starting to feel paranoid until something truly made my blood run cold. Looking out the window, I saw the figure again, but now it seemed closer. It was as if it had been there all along, waiting for the right time to act. The tension grew even worse the following weekend. Every night, something new seemed to happen. An object out of place, a footprint on the floor. But the worst was the day we noticed something unbelievable. When we went to bed, everything seemed normal. But when we woke up, we found a small frame with a photo of us taken during a moment in the garden. There was no explanation for it. We began searching the house, and when we reached the bathroom, the mirror was fogged, not from the humidity of a shower. Someone had left a message on the glass. The handwriting was shaky but clear. I saw everything. In that moment, my heart raced. We knew someone had been inside our house while we were sleeping, watching our every move. Fear began to take over everything. I couldn't look at any corner of the house without feeling uncomfortable. Every noise at night made me jump, and we started locking everything down even more. But it seemed useless. The worst part was the feeling that something was always there, watching, waiting for the right moment. We tried to talk rationally about what was happening, but there was no plausible explanation. We couldn't just believe that a stranger was entering our house at night without leaving a trace, but that's exactly what was happening. We were being stalked by someone who knew too much about our routine, someone who had been studying us with a precision that gave me chills just thinking about it. When we checked the footage from the security cameras, what we saw was more disturbing than anything we could have imagined. The figure in the recordings wasn't just any stranger, it was her ex-boyfriend. He was there in the footage, watching the house as if he knew exactly what he was doing. The most chilling part was seeing him approach the window. looking directly inside and then disappearing into the shadows, just as we had seen before. In one of the videos while we were sleeping, he entered through the back door, the one we had accidentally left unlocked. When he disappeared from the footage, it looked like he was sneaking into the house without leaving any signs of his exit. Everything made sense now. He had been around the entire time watching us. It seemed like a twisted obsession that had never ended. I didn't know what to do anymore or how to protect ourselves from someone who knew so much about us and was willing to cross any boundary to control us. That discovery left me frozen. The feeling of being watched all the time, of having something so intimate and personal violated, was unbearable. The fact that he had managed to get into our house without us noticing made me feel even more vulnerable. I started looking around every corner, afraid that he was still there, hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to do something worse. Everything in our daily lives now felt like an illusion, a facade he had managed to shatter, and now it felt like there was no going back. I called the police immediately, but a part of me knew he was already gone. What terrified me was that he knew exactly when to act, and I had no idea how many times he had already been there. The police arrived, investigated, and searched for more concrete evidence, but found nothing right away. It was as if he was a shadow that simply vanished whenever he got close to being caught. The strangest thing was when they tried to track down my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. He had gone completely silent, and the last time he was seen was weeks ago. After that, he disappeared. But the most unsettling revelation came later. The police discovered that he had tried to approach others in the neighborhood, but no one had given him attention. To him, it seemed we were the easiest targets. From that day on, nothing was normal anymore. I could never look out the window without a chill running down my spine, and my girlfriend, well, neither could she. Days passed, and the feeling of terror only grew. I no longer knew who to trust, whether he might reappear or if he was still watching us. Every noise at night made me jump out of bed, and each morning I felt like the sense of normalcy we once shared was completely lost. The life we had before all this seemed like a lie, as if it had all been part of a grand psychological game he had orchestrated. Sometimes I found myself looking at my girlfriend and wondering how many secrets she still kept about him, about what really happened between them. She also seemed distant, as if she was reliving everything, and I felt that nothing between us could ever be the same again. The most unsettling part, though, was that after a few months his behavior, her ex-boyfriend's, simply stopped. There were no more sightings, nothing unusual in the house, and he disappeared entirely, without explanation. The police did what they could, but he was never located. And now, after everything, the feeling of being watched still lingers, like a shadow that won't go away. I could never understand why he did all of it. The truth is, even with his absence, I don't feel safe. There are days when simply opening the front door makes me wonder if he's out there, waiting. But what scares me the most is the thought that maybe he's already back, disguised, watching everything again, waiting for the right moment to act. I never thought something like this could happen to me. It was a quiet night, a romantic dinner I had planned for my girlfriend. We were at home, enjoying our time together, just the two of us. The soft glow of candles and the aroma of the food gave a sense of comfort and safety, but something about that night felt off. During dinner, I noticed something that made me pause for a second, a shadow at the window. I didn't think much of it at the time, but an uneasy feeling washed over me. I looked at my girlfriend, and without saying a word, she looked in the same direction. That's when we saw it clearly. Someone was standing outside, watching us. We tried to ignore it. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone just passing by, or even a shadow caused by our own movement. But as the night went on and the lights went out, a strange feeling began to take over me. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure. The next day, we went out for a walk, and when we returned, we saw footprints in our backyard. They weren't normal footprints, they were dirty marks, as if someone had been walking there for hours. The worst part was noticing that objects in the garden, like a chair and a plant, had been moved. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. We could no longer ignore it. Someone was trying to get closer. The feeling of being watched was undeniable, and I couldn't relax anymore. Each night, the figure at the window became more constant, more distinct, as if it were waiting for the right moment to come even closer. We started locking all the doors and windows, but even so, something felt like it was still watching us. One night, waking up in the middle of the night, I noticed something even more terrifying. The painting that always hung on the living room wall had moved slightly. I went to check, but found nothing. I was starting to feel paranoid until something truly made my blood run cold. Looking out the window, I saw the figure again, but this time it seemed closer. It felt as if it had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to act. The tension grew even more the following weekend. Each night, something new seemed to happen. An object out of place, a footprint on the floor. But the worst came when we discovered something unbelievable. When we went to bed, everything seemed normal. But upon waking, we found a small frame with a photo of us, a moment when we were in the garden. There was no explanation for it. We began searching the house, and when we got to the bathroom, the mirror was fogged up, but not from the humidity of a shower. Someone had written a message on the glass. The writing was shaky but clear. I saw everything. At that moment, my heart raced. We knew someone had been inside our house while we were sleeping, watching our every move. Fear began to take over everything. I couldn't look at the corners of the house without feeling uneasy. Every noise at night made me jump, and we started locking everything even more. But it seemed useless. The worst part was the feeling that something was always there, watching us, waiting for the right moment. We tried to rationally discuss what was happening, but there was no plausible explanation. We couldn't simply believe that a stranger was entering our house at night without leaving any signs, but that was exactly what was happening. We were being stalked by someone who knew too much about our routine, someone who was studying us with a precision that gave me chills just thinking about it. When we reviewed the footage from the security cameras, what we saw was more disturbing than anything we could have imagined. The figure in the recording wasn't just some random stranger, it was her ex-boyfriend. He was there in the footage, watching the house as if he knew exactly what he was doing. The most unsettling part was seeing him approach the window, look directly inside, and then disappear into the shadows, just as we had seen before. In one of the videos, while we were sleeping, he entered through the back door, the one we had left unlocked by mistake. When he vanished from the footage, it seemed like he was sneaking inside the house with no signs that he had left. It all made sense now. He had been around the whole time, watching us, and it all felt like an obsession that had never ended. I didn't know what to do anymore, or how to protect us from someone who knew so much about us and was willing to cross any boundary to control us. That discovery left me paralyzed. The feeling of being constantly watched, of something so intimate and personal being violated, was unbearable. The fact that he had managed to enter our house without us noticing made me feel even more vulnerable. I started looking around every corner, afraid he might still be there, hiding somewhere, waiting for the right moment to do something worse. Everything about our daily life seemed like an illusion, a facade he had managed to shatter, and now it felt like there was no going back. I called the police immediately, but part of me knew he was already gone. What terrified me was that he had known exactly when to act, and I had no idea how many times he had already been there. The police arrived, conducted their investigation, and searched for concrete evidence, but they didn't find anything right away. It was as if he were a shadow that simply vanished whenever he got closer to being caught. The strangest part was when they tried to track down my girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. He was completely silent, and the last time he had been seen was weeks ago. Since then, he had disappeared. But what the police discovered next was even more unsettling. Her ex had tried to approach other people in the neighborhood, but no one had paid attention to him. To him, it seemed like we were the easiest targets. From that day on, nothing was the same. I could never look out the window without feeling a chill, and my girlfriend, well, she couldn't either. Days passed, and the sense of terror only grew. I didn't know who to trust anymore, whether he might show up again or if he was still watching us. Every sound at night made me jump out of bed. And with each dawn, I felt like the normalcy we once shared was completely lost. The life we had until that moment felt like a lie, as if everything had been part of a grand psychological game he had orchestrated. Sometimes I found myself looking at my girlfriend and wondering how many secrets she still kept about him, about what had really happened between them. She also seemed distant, as if she were reliving everything, and I felt that nothing could ever be the same between us. The most unsettling part, though, was that after a few months, his behavior, her ex-boyfriend, simply stopped. There were no more appearances, nothing strange was found in the house, and he disappeared completely without explanation. The police did what they could, but he was never located. And now, after everything, the feeling of being watched still lingers, like a shadow that won't go away. I've never been able to understand why all of this happened. The truth is that even in his absence, I don't feel safe. There are days when simply opening the front door makes me wonder if he's out there waiting. But what scares me the most is that sometimes I start to ask myself, could he already be back, disguised, watching everything again, waiting for the right moment to strike?